The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents International Focus, a weekly discussion of the people and events behind today's global headlines. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now here's your host, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus. Our topic today, the African National Congress at 100. Founded in 1912, the ANC is one of the world's oldest liberation movements. And after playing a pivotal role in the negotiated end of the apartheid regime in South Africa, it has been the country's ruling party for nearly 2 decades. Today, 100 years after its establishment, 2 decades on from its ascent to political leadership, a different set of challenges now confront the ANC. In the post-apartheid era, the struggle to consolidate democracy and address material inequality in South African society is testing a new generation of leaders. For a look at the ANC's place in South Africa's history and an exploration of what the future may hold, including its diplomatic presence here in this country, we're joined by Vuyiswa Tulelo, head of mission at the Chicago office of the South African Consulate General. She most recently served in our government's Department of International Relations and Cooperation, and previously was the Secretary General for the African National Congress Youth League. Also with us, Johannes Britz, Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at UWM. In addition to his administrative duties, Dr. Britz has broad international experience as both a researcher and consultant, specializing in social justice and information poverty. He holds 2 doctoral degrees from the University of Pretoria. Well, welcome both of you to International Focus.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doug.
Well, perhaps we could start with just sort of a brief history. We have 100 years of the ANC. If you could just sort of walk us through some of the high points along the way.
Oh, there's a lot to cover, but I'll try to be brief. In the 100 years that you're looking at an organization that has managed to transform itself from a party of gentlemen who did business through deputations and petitions and was focusing more on an elitist sort of approach to organizing and dealing with the monster of apartheid and separation, to an organization that went into a mass-based formation that put in place the first mass actions in South Africa through the 1960 uprisings, that was able to negotiate both internal and external role players as part of the machinery they used to be able to highlight the plight of South Africans and the conditions that they were living in. So you're looking at an organization that spent a lot of time between 1966 to at least 1989, that spent its time operating in exile of the crowns of South Africa. And therefore, you were looking at an organization that had to develop some pretty interesting skills to deal with the international and the diplomatic arena. And you had ANC representation in almost all countries in the world who were also able to highlight the plight of the ANC. But closer to that, in your 1986, building up to the 1989, when the ANC was quite sure that there's a new possibility for negotiated settlement in South Africa, they started preparing their own members and their leadership to be able to govern the country. So they sort of turned the focus into academic excellence, and they started training people who would be administrators at different levels of government, and training people who would be legislators and would be able to pass the relevant laws. Into the 1990s, the early 1990s at least, South Africa had become somewhat of an ungovernable country through the auspices of the United Democratic Front, which brought together an array of social actors against apartheid. It was not only the ANC. You had your religious formations, your workers, your students' formations, women's formations that were clapping together to bring an end to the scourge of apartheid. And then the ANC had to redefine itself once it came into power, whether it would like to see itself as purely a liberation movement or whether it would see itself as a party party in government. Well, that's a conversation that's still happening up until this date as to what is the true nature of the ANC. But for the most part of it, including its last conference, they agreed in Polokwane, they agreed that it will continue to possess that element of being a liberation movement with a mass-based formation to enable its members to be able to have input and make meaningful suggestions to how the ANC needs to be able to run itself. Into the next century, after turning 100 years, the challenges that the ANC is facing now is how to modernize itself, because its means of organizing, its means of recruitment are becoming absolute. There's no person who would like to go and spend 3 hours in the sun listening to one person making a long speech about something or the other. They need to find new ways of getting their message out there, but most importantly, they need to find new ways and new ideas to solving the problems that they've promised the people of South Africa that they will take on when they became the government of South Africa in 1994.
Well, Johannes, what was your experience growing up? I mean, you know, certainly the ANC, as we've heard, really came to the fore in that period just prior to the transfer. But when you were a child growing up, was it in the background in your community, or you know, was it something that people really were aware of on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think South Africa was very divided. You know, as a white Afrikaner person growing up in South Africa, you hardly ever had any social contact. If I had grown up on a farm, I probably would have. My dad grew up on a farm and he speaks Tswana fluently. But once you grow older, your roads just go separately, and you end up in the, you know, in the post office, you know, for whites only and for blacks, and the, you know, that was your mindset. That's how you grew up. That's when you go to a university. So when I was at university, the 1976 uprising, I was my first year. So the way our perception about the ANC was pretty much formed by the ideology of, you know, we are there as the light of Africa, bringing, you know, Christianity. And I remember Oliver Tambo is quoted for saying, you know, when the white people arrived, they gave us the Bible and said, pray. And when we close our eyes to pray, they took our land. So I think that did play a role. I think religion played a major role in the way we, you know, there was this philosophy from the Dutch, actually, Dooyeweerd, you know, separate but equal. So truly, you know, as you grow up, you believe, you know, we are separate but equal. But when you see the reality, and, you know, I think from, I would say, in my era, my age group of people, the change we all sensed we have to change. There's no way South Africa could be a country of prosperity for everybody in the way with economic sanctions and the military struggle. That there can be no win-win at the end other than to destruct the country. So actually a member of parliament in 1990 came to meet with a few of us, and he said, you know, the sun on the old South Africa is going to be gone forever, and F.W. Clark is going to make a huge announcement. And at that stage we didn't really know. And on the 2nd of February 1990 he made that announcement. And I can tell you, you know, because if you live as an individual, as a white person in the country, and suddenly, you know, in the last 10 years, you know, you are in you are kind of as an oppressor structurally. For us, it was also freedom, but it's also the fear. You know, how is it going to end up? Was there going to be a military coup? You know, is there going to be mass violence? So I remember a lot of people bought gold and they bought food and they stacked it. What's going to happen? Because I came here in 2001 as a visiting professor. So you went through the whole, you know, the uncertainty. And that, I think the most difficult period of uncertainty was, for me at least, you know, 88, 89 up to 94. Is it, you know, is it going to end up in a tribal, you know, what's going to happen? You know, is there, what about the far right wing? What about the, you know, and then to change the mind of people. Because remember, as a white person, you grew up that the ANC is communists. And we are there for the free world. So changing people, I thought, you know, when the change happened, and I thought President Mandela was remarkable in using also a sporting event, the rugby, to unite the nation. I don't know if you remember 1995. And that feeling of unity, and you say, wow, I could identify. And that change that happened since, and the fact that we could have new symbols, a new national flag, a new anthem, names. So I think, you know, that unity is truly a miracle, and I think a wonderful example for the way a country so divided that I know people before 1980 said, this country is doomed. And that ability to forgive and to set aside fears and work together to build a new nation, I'm very proud of that.
So you mentioned Oliver Tambo. Let's talk a little bit about some of those sort of larger-than-life figures in the early days. What role did they play in that transition?
Well, you had for each epoch in the life of the ANC, you had some sort of a figure that was spearheading. And at the early years of formation, you have the caliber of Nkosi Albert Luthuli. And I mean, those were the gentlemen who were bringing to the fore what an enlightened mind can do if you have an African who has the necessary tools and understanding to deal with the world both globally and nationally. And he sort of highlighted and celebrated for pushing the ANC to keep education as close as possible to the liberation struggle. Because you did come to a point where people had to make a choice. Is it freedom or is it education? Which one is it that is going to come first? And he was saying that you could actually get them both. You know, you don't need to separate them. You could educate your people and still free them from all sorts of oppressions. And then you had the caliber of your Mandela and your Sisulu them. They were then the younger people in the ANC. They were the ones who were the firebrands, who brought in new energy, new vibe into the ANC, and who brought that aspect of mass mobilization to get the whole people of South Africa speaking to each other and understanding what the challenges were. And the one thing about OR is that, and I think it's something that we most of the time don't pay much attention to, is the fact that OR was the longest serving president of the ANC, and not because he was elected, because he had such a long interrupted period where the ANC could not have a conference and elect its leadership in a closed environment, but it had to be deferred. You know, there had to be consultation with the ANC underground, the ANC abroad. But the one thing about OR is to us who grew up listening to his speeches and following his trademark, he is what a diplomat par excellence would represent to us, because OR was the type of person who would be able to walk into a meeting of heads of states and engage with them at an equal level about the bad impact that apartheid had on South Africa, both on the whites and on the blacks. As you're saying that you were the oppressor, but you were also trapped in the system because you didn't have a choice. The white child was not told, now you can choose whether you want to be this or this. You were told, thou shalt be, you know. And it takes a long time to get out of that mindset. In the same way that the black child didn't have a choice to be told that, oh, you can choose whether you want to be a little brilliant black person or whether you would like to be a stupid. You were told, black, fat, must be stupid, and that's the end of the story, you know. So you had OR who had to be able to encompass all those capabilities, to engage heads of states as an equal partner, but to be able to come down and engage the ordinary folk on the street and explain to them why it is important that South Africa must be one nation. We could have our different cultural dynamics and dimensions, but it does not mean we cannot be one nation. And most of the time we celebrate the legacy of Nelson Mandela because he is the one person who we have had the opportunity to engage with even after the oppressive years. And unfortunately, we didn't have that beauty and privilege with OR Tambo. OR Tambo single-handedly put together the Harare Declaration. The Harare Declaration is the document that was adopted in Lusaka in 1989 that paved the way for the negotiations between the South African government and the ANC. So that whole period from 1990 to right up to 1993, that negotiation stalling process, it was guided by a document that was put together by OR Tambo. How he put that together, he traveled the length and the breadth of the world, collecting ideas from South Africans who were abroad, speaking about the evils of apartheid, but also collecting wisdom from our friends who hosted us, so that you are able to pull together the best trends into what would be South Africa today. The Constitution of South Africa, as we know it today, it's a direct result of the work that Oliver Tambo did. And these are moments that we don't get to celebrate sufficiently because, unfortunately, we didn't have the privilege of having him long into the new dispensation. But if you look at Nelson Mandela, he was then able to embodify this unique element of the ANC, being able to go from a hot-headed young man into a statesman par excellence. And I think he is a perfect example of what the ANC seeks to do. It takes you from the street as a hot-headed young person, brings you into the fold of the ANC, educates you about the importance of a united, prosperous and peaceful South Africa, and says to you, you need to be able to go out there and find other South Africans, irrespective of their color, race or creed. Because they are South Africans, they need to have an equal share to this beautiful land of South Africa, and move into representing that statement-like approach of doing with things, that if you disagree with person, it doesn't mean you need to take out knives or guns and shoot each other. You could do that over around the table and come to a conclusion that we don't agree on this matter, let's find another way of dealing with this matter. So those are the kind of figures you're talking about when you're speaking about your heroic figures within the ANC.
Well, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we can talk a bit more about sort of going forward. And to our viewers, we'll be right back.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're talking with Consul General Tulelo from the Consulate of South Africa in Chicago and UWM Provost Johannes Britz. Well, you know, we were talking before the break about that individual transformation that the ANC provides for its individual members who come in perhaps with a different agenda and really have to work within a very different government structure. What is the similar kind of process that had to go through at a organizational level when the ANC ceased to be a liberation movement and actually had power? I mean, first of all, what was the perceptions on the part of the white South African community, as you recall it, in that era? I mean, was that a transition that people thought was going to be possible?
Well, as I said previously, I think, you know, there was, of course, a lot of fear and angst amongst people, uncertainty. And I think, you know, the two leaders at the time from the National Party at that stage, President de Klerk and then President Mandela, and I think the ability of those two leaders to get the people together was key in building trust or rebuilding trust between the different groupings within South Africa and ideological thinking. And I think for the first years, there was kind of they call it a joint government or government of unity, national unity. And that when you had, was it two presidents, if I recall?
Two deputy presidents.
Two deputy presidents. And I thought that built kind of a framework in the way we could move forward. Now, and I, for some historical reasons, there was a breakaway. You know, politicians don't always talk the same language. But I think that put a lot of people at ease. I think that brought the average South African all died for peace. And I think that broad middle group, I don't know if you would agree, said, you know, we want to work together to make this work. Of course, you had the two extreme ends, I think, which could, you know, tip the balance. But, you know, when we look back, we can say, you know, thank you. It worked out well. By creating that interim period was about for 4 years, I think.
For 5 years.
For 5 years. So that helped a lot. To also, I think the transition probably for the ANC from a liberation movement into a more government responsibility.
And so now, going forward, where does South Africa see itself in the world?
Well, South Africa sees itself not only as a part of the world, but as an integral piece to make this puzzle called the global community and society work. And we would like to make an equal contribution as all other countries. And that's why the South African government has taken this approach to have priority-driven focuses. And one of the areas that the South African government is focusing on currently is on infrastructure development and education and training, because we need to be able to deal with the legacies of apartheid apartheid, because the beauty about apartheid is that it gave you two worlds in one country. You had a first world country and you had a third world country. And depending on which side you would deal with, you wouldn't know what was happening. But once you had this collapse of these two countries into one, you were then able to see the impact of how deep those divisions were going. And governing for 10 years, it's not sufficient to be able to eradicate all those inequities. But the ANC now has taken an approach that says, not only do we want to develop this infrastructure so that we can spread the resources, but it is in the interest of South Africa to utilize the technical skills and abilities of those former Afrikaners, white people, whatever you call them, to be able to impart their skills to our people. Because as you rightly pointed out, that as an Afrikaner young man, you would go to university, at a time appointed, you would go to do the military training, come back, go to university, get married, manage something there. But you needed to be able to know that that's where your world was. Now you need to fight for the space. Because if two young people are coming to Wits University and look for a study opportunity, it's not going to matter whether you are black or white. What is going to matter is the matter that is between your ears. And those are the type of transfer that we need to be able to make available. And secondly is to make sure that we get into these partnerships with other countries that would help us to maximize the opportunity of infrastructure development. When we want to expand our electrical supply grid, we are almost at about 80% of providing electricity. The 20% that is outstanding, it's not because there's no will, it's because the topography of South Africa just makes it almost next to impossible to penetrate those areas. What you need now is the skills of other countries who have had to work the same road before, and to learn from them how do you penetrate those areas to make sure that you can supply electricity, you can supply water, you can bring roads and that type of infrastructure to them. And we want to get into those partnerships. And when we get sent out to these missions all across the world, we are told one thing, and one thing that is crystal clear. You are not going there to become beggars. You are not carrying a basket of a little pitiful country that's asking for a donation of $10 here and $10 there. You are going to look for partnerships. And those partnerships should be beneficial both to your host country and to the people of South Africa. And that's my mission here as I'm in Chicago with the Midwest, to find those kind of opportunities to say, what is it that we can learn from the Midwest that can benefit our people, and what is it that can benefit the people of the Midwest? How do we strengthen those relationships so that in another 100 years time, we don't speak about the apartheid South Africa, we speak about this new South Africa that is an equal citizen in this global village. And
how does this process look to you from your perch here in the Midwest?
No, it's exciting. I mean, I read every day the South African newspapers because I want to be informed, because, you know, I still are very well connected to South Africa, and actually there's a number of us here on campus, because I believe, you know, even if you move away, there's always a brain gain, there's always your connectivity. So I do a lot of work still in South Africa, actually in Africa. And mainly, you know, my focus is, for example, on information ethics in the African continent. You know, the global, you know, digital technologies make a major impact on the African continent. And the question arises, how do you reflect from a moral perspective on these challenges? You know, privacy. You know, I just received a personal privacy bill in South Africa. They sent it today to me to ask for comments, and because I helped them also on the access to information bill. So I'm going to send them my comments, and I said, well, that is fantastic that the Department of Communication, we work with them, we've got a grant from them. So I always see that, you know, even wherever we are, even here in the Midwest, the South Africans that travel abroad, the investment in Africa is education. If you educate people, Africa can become is in a way an exporter of knowledge. But in a way, we also lose people. Unfortunately, I think about 70% in some countries of graduates leave Africa and they never return. My sense is, you leave, but you're always there. So I think, just as you said, you know, the investment that you can put back in the continent, and then so if you can develop that, they can export. So that's I see as a major contribution.
And there is a convention coming up in December that will determine the leadership. What do you think some of the challenges, regardless of who is in a leadership role going forward, will be?
Well, as I said before, the challenge for the ANC now is to redesign its organizational and mobilization capacity. And that's what Mangaung is going to be dealing with. And it doesn't matter who comes out at the helm of the ANC. If the ANC doesn't answer the question how to make itself relevant to the current generation of people, South Africa is getting younger and younger by the day. So the ANC needs to respond to that reality. And that's what they will be dealing with in Mangaung. How do they redesign the organizational design of the ANC? But most importantly, how do they make sure that the ANC as the center of power gives clear and instructive direction to the government to be able to solve these underlying inequalities that have been created by apartheid? Because the current crop of young people who are out there do not know apartheid. They hear about it, they have not experienced it. And you need to be able to make sure that when you give them opportunities, you don't have to say that, oh, in apartheid, this is what used to happen. So those are the challenges that the ANC will be dealing with in Mangaung.
Well, thank you very much. We'll have to leave it at that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deb.
And to our viewers, we'll see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,